Welcome, I'm Darren, and I'll be your guide today as I look at the 1993 Score football set. Now, 93 was the pivotal year for Score, where it was transitioning from the early phase of its late 80s, early 90s existence into the middle of the 90s, which was a transition everybody had to go through. And Score started that transition in 1993. Basically, 1993 is the last year of their early phase, and you can see that they realize they got to make a shift, but they don't know what the shift is. So this is a card set that still has a lot of subsets in it, but the card approach, the way that they approached the set, was quite different. And that starts off with the fact that they used the same card design across all three sports, something they'd never done before and really wouldn't do again until 1997. Those are really the only two times when they did all three sets the same way, and so it shows it shows the kind of the struggle that was going on with the brand at both times for different reasons. But this set, the big change they made for the cards in this set is the fact that they no longer had the card themed around the set itself, which had always been the case. In 1988, when they launched their card set, the card set itself had a color sequence to it that overrode the entire set. And even though they would add team colors in some of their sets, they were buried within the rest of the card design until 1993, when in this case they only used team colors for the distinction of the different sections of the card, allowing this card set to fit more for collectors than it did for standing as its own set. Where they have on the side, they have two team colors, one being the keystone right down the corner where they have the position name. But it's the card back where you really get to see the card basically bathed in fan spirit for each one of these players. A cool treat to this card, but for a card company that liked to scatter cards around throughout the set, it did lose the continuity that the set had always maintained in the past and would get back to in the future, simply because now you got all these colors showing up all over the place, which just doesn't make as much sense in a random assortment of players as it does if a set is built structured around each team. The rookies, however, is where this set really gets to be interesting, because Score, when it launched in its football brand in 1989, it wanted to be the rookie brand, and for the most part, it invented rookies. And it tried to maintain that, except Pro Set was right there with them, always breathing down their neck, and actually Pro Set was usually succeeding better than Score did. Now, Score wanted to be the first brand on the market for rookies, and so the way that their 1990 and 1991 Series 1 releases worked was they didn't even bother to wait for the draft. They put in rookies into their first series that may or may not be successes, and in most cases they weren't. So you would have Junior Seau and Barry Foster, but outside of that, you hardly had anybody of note in Series 1. Series 2, they would still want to be first to market, and so they would have rookies aligned with teams, but they still had the college uniforms. They didn't do any theming around the teams. So the set was still able to move quickly out the door without having to wait until there was a whole redesign and thus be first on the shelves. But in 1992, they went with a single series. Now, to be first on the market, you got to figure out, do you wait for the draft or jump out before the draft? And they like to jump out before the draft, or as close to the draft as they could. So the rookies in 1992 were not built around the draft. They were built around prospects, where on the card back they did mention each individual team, but the collection of rookies that they chose were kind of a weird rookie group, even in an off year like 1992, where there weren't really stars in the rookie or in the draft for that year. They still had rookies that just didn't quite make sense. So they were losing out on the ability to have impactful rookies, which means, why do you care that Score comes out before the competitors? Because their rookies really aren't that big of a deal. So in 1993, because they were still doing a single set, they needed to figure out how do they time it. And what they chose to do was to do something still kind of similar, where the players are still in their college uniforms, but they waited till the draft so they knew who the players were going to be, and it allowed them to put team color theming on each of the cards, meaning that even though the cards still had college uniforms on them, now it looked professional for their future, and they were the big stars, and they got the big stars in this set. But there weren't very many cards because the card set had shrunk. In 1990 and 91, it was a 660 or 660 plus set. In 1992, they shrank it down to 550. Well, now it's 440. And the rookie draft class is a big part of where they pulled cards out of, so there weren't a lot of rookies. The few that were in the set, thankfully, were big names. But like I said, for 1993, this was important because it was the last year that Score put a lot of subset cards into the set. And it doesn't have a lot of the spirit of the previous years. That you don't really feel continuity with these cards. In fact, interestingly, the first subset, which is Double Trouble, is really more of a nod back to 1989 by having two players from the same team who work as a tandem. In 1989, the subset that they had was called Combos. And this was a great feature where you got to see two different players on the same team that were stars. Well, in 1993, they altered it a bit where they still had two teammates, whether it was a quarterback and receiver, or a couple of safeties, or a couple of defensive linemen. But they spread it out. So instead of having a lot of superstars in it, you got to see more of different position groups spread out throughout the subset, which is kind of an interesting perk to the set, the way that they created it. They clearly weren't swinging for the fences with the biggest names, but I wish that card sets like this were done more often, where you get to see pairs of teammates on a card to give more of the continuity of the team and the team dynamic between the players. It's just pretty rare, and this is one of the few cases. Now, they also had two subsets they carried over from 1992 specifically, the first being Rookie of the Year. For Rookie of the Year, this is the four players who are Rookie of the Year, two from the AFC, two from the NFC, offensive and defensive Rookies of the Year. Again, this is not a draft, like I referred to, the 1992 draft wasn't exactly a highlight for drafts in NFL history. So Carl Pickens was the biggest name really in the early years. So it's not like there are names in here that are going to wow you. But to be fair, that was the case with the 1991 Rookies of the Year as well. So here in this set, we got four players with the Rookie of the Year, which are good enough, but nothing spectacular. Now, the other subset that is really kind of a carryover from 1992 is kind of a two-parter, and yet it's not a two-parter, which is the season highlights cards. Early on, they didn't bother to do this in football, even though they were doing it over in baseball, and were they doing? I think they were doing it in hockey, and in 1991 they were doing it in hockey. So in football, they didn't get around to the season highlights till 92, and then in 93 they continued with it, just a couple of cards, but they also added not just one, but two cards of the Super Bowl. Kind of unusual because the Super Bowl is one game, so you really only need to have one card, but look, the Dallas Cowboys won the Super Bowl, and Score was centered out of Dallas, so I guess they were just really excited about it. So that meant there were two Super Bowl cards, but they didn't attach them next to the subset of highlights cards. They actually had it as the first subset. Really excited to get to it. So they don't even work together. They're kind of separated apart. Not that there's anything about that. It's just that they didn't blend these subsets together the way that you normally would. And a note, most of these subsets are really short. They just didn't have a lot of subset cards. They did have one 3-year run of a subset, though, in terms of the 90-plus club. And this is players who essentially took it to the house. They went from the 10-yard line or further back all the way across the field. They started doing this in 1991. They continued in 1992. And 1993 would be the last year that we get this. But this was a good year for it because Steve Emtman, who was technically the superstar player from the 1992 draft, was one of the players who took it 90 yards, but he was a defensive lineman. And that meant that he set a record for the longest touchdown run by a defensive lineman. So even though his career flamed out pretty quickly, at least he had that. So he gave that to the Colts. So that was a benefit for them. But other than that, that was the 90-yard club set. And while I said that that was a 3-year set, there was also a 4-year tradition that Score had, that Pro Set had as well, which was Hall of Famers. Unfortunately, this would be the last year that we'd be seeing Hall of Famers from Score and obviously from Pro Set, which is a real shame because, well, I feel like we should have Hall of Famers in card sets more often, and Topps would pick it up, but we've rarely had Hall of Fame cards or cards of Hall of Famers in mainstream card sets in pro sports, or in the football market at least. And so at least we got a few of these, which had been started in 1990, and they were continuing it through here. Always good to see who the superstars from the past are that are being honored. And then they closed it out with a single card, which is for the 3rd year they did their Man of the Year award. And for this year it was Steve Young, which is very fitting because he was now finally being given the reins of being a starter, and it's about time. Joe Montana was going to be moving on to the Chiefs, and so Steve Young, the sun was finally shining on him, and very soon he'd be able to show off his stuff in the Super Bowl. But it's good to honor him with this card. I certainly think so. And that's the set. Now, outside of the set, there were 2 insert sets, which I'll get to, and then there's another special set beyond that. But there was one sort of a promo card, and that was... So in 1999, Score made a contract with Franco Harris to represent the company, and so for many years they made promo cards around him. In 1993, they lined up with Dick Butkus in order to make a promo card of his. Now, I have seen in the Beckett that there's supposed to be a promo card and then also the autograph card. I believe they're the same thing. I don't know for sure, but it sure seems like they are, so that's what I'm going with. But at any rate, the autograph card that they made as a promotional opportunity for the 1993 release is a horizontal card with a full bleed image, and interestingly, there's no foil on this card. Not gold foil, not copper foil, not orange foil. It's just a straightforward glossy surface to the card, autograph on it, but on the card back, you'll notice that these are all individually serial numbered out of 3,000. Pretty limited run, but beautiful calligraphy writing for the serial number, making these cards really gorgeous. Now, in packs, they did have 2 insert sets, and the first insert set is an insert set you would expect, which is Dream Team. In 1991, they debuted Dream Team for the football card market with one of the all-time greatest cards ever. This is a magnificent looking card. 1992, the card didn't quite live up to the same expectation, but still a very good card. And then in 1993, they decided to get back more into the spirit of the 1991 set, where they have a really dark and moody sky background behind the shot of the player and the action shot of the player. And the cards are not that incredibly uncommon to get. They're not super rare. They did, however, have another insert set which was harder to get, which was Franchise. And the Franchise cards are 1 card per team across the entire set. These cards also have a very dark spirit to them, a virtually black background behind the player. Pretty good looking cards, and certainly more challenging than the design would necessarily assume. But that's all they did for inserts, just the 2 of those. They did do one other thing, which was they had a promotional deal with Ore-Ida. And so Ore-Ida released a card set of quarterbacks. And these quarterback cards are identical to the cards in the main set, except for the fact that the image on the front can be different. Now, the backs are identical. So the way to tell the difference is if you look for the card number and you see quarterback instead of the card number, then you need to look down just below the biostats and you'll see the actual card number there. That's the difference between the cards on the back. You know, it's kind of hard to remember all of the images on the front so you know that side, but on the back, it's pretty easy when you look for the card number and it ain't there. That's the way to tell the difference with them. And that's what they did for 1993. Now, 1994, they would make a hard pivot. The cards would go in a wildly different direction where they would now look pop-oriented, and it was all built around parallels. They also got more into inserts, which was about time, but not heavily into inserts, so they'd still have a ways to go. But they were now starting to make that transition into the mid-90s. 1993 was the last year before they went there. I'll be looking at that set in, that'll be coming up, so definitely look out for that. If you haven't followed along with the journey of Score football from '89 up through 1992, I've already got those videos up, so you can go check those out. Do subscribe if you haven't done so already, and thank you very much for watching.